Welcome to the Geostrategic Podcast.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're cutting straight to the core of a potential conflict brewing in the Southern Caribbean. You know, for years, most people probably thought of this region mainly for tourism, right? But our sources, they show it's rapidly becoming this new global flashpoint. You've got massive energy wealth, organized crime, and big power competition all colliding. It's really shaking up the map. You wanted to know what's really driving this high-stakes collision of factors that could, frankly, lead to a serious new conflict. So our mission today is to unpack the sources, understand exactly why everyone suddenly cares so much about this corner of the world. We'll be focusing squarely on, well, the three key players in this new energy race: Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? How quickly the stability, the perceived stability of the whole region is eroding. It's not just about positive economic development anymore. The Southern Caribbean is currently under a pretty heavy shadow, and that's thanks to these powerful transnational criminal networks. They're trafficking drugs, guns, people. But, this is key, that criminal element is, well, it's tied directly into the geopolitical maneuvering.
And Venezuela seems central to that instability picture.
Absolutely central. Under President Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela hasn't just struggled. It's become a major criminal transit zone. And worse, Caracas is now aggressively claiming, two-thirds of its neighbor, Guyana, reactivating a territorial dispute that was pretty much dormant.
A peaceful neighbor, too.
Exactly. And this move, plus Maduro deepening his ties with China, Russia, Iran. That's why the U.S. is visibly ratcheting up the tension. That U.S. naval flotilla we saw offshore Venezuela recently. It's a clear, maybe subtle, but clear reminder that Washington is watching very closely.
Right. So that naval presence, he'd suggest the U.S. interest here goes way beyond just, say, drug interdiction or the usual historical political pressure on Caracas. It feels like it's fundamentally about protecting assets, big assets. Our sources are calling this whole economic shift the Southern Caribbean energy matrix, and it's centered, like we said, on Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. The scale of the boom, especially in Guyana, it's just stunning. I mean, in only a few years, it's become the sixth largest oil producer in the Western Hemisphere. Current output is already over 660,000 barrels per day. But it's the future projections. Those are the numbers that really grab your attention.
They really are. The expected growth rate, it's almost unprecedented. By 2030, Guyana is projected to hit 1.3 million barrels per day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. To put that in perspective, that instantly makes them a globally significant player, not just regional, global.
And who's buying all this oil?
Well, interestingly, it's not just the U.S. Our sources show that in 2024, Europe was actually the biggest buyer. It took about 66% of Guyana's exports. Then you had China, India, and the United States following. So it's a diverse customer base. And this boom, it's starting to spill over, impacting Guyana's neighbors too.
Okay, so how does Suriname fit into this new energy picture then?
Suriname's falling pretty closely behind Guyana. You've got France's Total Energies and the U.S. company APA Investing. What is it? About $10.5 billion?
$10.5 billion?
Yep. A huge sum to bring major commercial quantities online there too. And we really can't overlook Trinidad and Tobago in this equation. They're vital. They've got a long history exporting natural gas, and crucially, they already have developed industrial infrastructure. So the potential here is for these three countries to create this sophisticated cross-border energy hub, something strategically indispensable.
Right.
So what, for you listening, is this? Even with the global shift to renewables, oil and gas are going to remain incredibly important for decades. And these three nations, they're now key pieces, really critical pieces on that global energy chessboard.
Okay, but when you get billions of dollars suddenly flooding into a small region, one that's maybe not fully equipped to handle it, that inevitably creates a magnet for, well, the less pristine dimensions, right? Illicit activity. This massive influx of legitimate cash creates huge opportunities for the shadow economy, too.
Precisely. The Southern Caribbean sits right on a critical, legitimate trade route, linked to the Panama Canal. But it's also become a major highway for illicit flows. We're talking huge amounts of South American cocaine, increasingly heading to Europe now, not just North America. And then you have guns flowing south from the U.S., all compounded by human trafficking. And Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, and Tobago.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they sit right in the middle of these transit routes.
And are they equipped to handle that level of criminal traffic?
That's the problem. The vulnerability, especially for the smaller island nations, but even the coastal states, it's palpable. Most Caribbean nations, they have small security forces, limited resources, and many are struggling with really high debt-to-GDP ratios. Now, Guyana's new oil wealth gives them a bit of a financial cushion, sure, but the region as a whole, it's susceptible to being overwhelmed by these large, well-funded transnational criminal groups.
Which brings us back again to Venezuela as the core destabilizing factor.
Exactly. Maduro's economic mismanagement has been, frankly, catastrophic. The economy shrank by 75% between 2014 and 2021. 75%.
Unbelievable.
It is, and it's forced over 8 million Venezuelans to flee their homes, creating enormous pressure on neighboring countries.
So with that kind of internal collapse, how is the regime actually staying afloat? How does it maintain power?
It's a potent mix. You've got foreign support. Yes, China, Russia, Iran, Cuba all play a role. But critically, it's also deeply entangled with criminal activities. And these activities are even tied to state-controlled oil flows. Key figures, military and political figures in the Maduro regime, are allegedly involved in what's known as the Cartel of the Sun.
The Cartel of the Sun.
Yeah. It's essentially a high-level criminal network within the state. And it was recently sanctioned, designated as a specifically designated global terrorist organization.
Wow. Okay, so that sounds like an extremely serious high-level criminal operation. What kind of links are they alleged to actually have?
The allegations are serious, providing material support to foreign terrorist organizations. For instance, links to Trinidad Tobago.
Ah, that gang.
Yeah, that massive transnational criminal group. Started in a Venezuelan prison, now spread across the hemisphere. They were allegedly involved in that 2024 murder of the dissident Ronald Ojeda down in Chile. And they also allegedly support Colombia's ELN guerrilla group, which is heavily involved in the drug trade, gold smuggling. But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe most dangerous for the region right now.
Okay.
It's the move against Guyana. Maduro hasn't just talked about it. He's revived the claim to the Essequibo region, that mineral-rich two-thirds of Guyana. He's declared it a new Venezuelan department, started building up military forces along the border. This direct threat against a neighbor, especially one becoming a U.S.-backed energy powerhouse, is what's truly ramped up the geopolitical friction. It raises the real risk of armed conflict.
And this escalation, it's not happening in a vacuum, is it? It's right in the middle of this clear geopolitical rivalry. Venezuela has very explicitly sided with that, well, anti-U.S. alliance, an early member of China's Belt and Road Initiative, deep ties with Russia, Iran. The sources we looked at suggest the U.S. response is a push towards a, quote, more muscular approach. Even a reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine. For listeners who might not be familiar, the Monroe Doctrine, that's that historical U.S. policy, basically asserting U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere, pushing back against outside powers.
Right. And that old doctrine seems to be getting dusted off for 4 very modern reasons now. First, the U.S. sees the Southern Caribbean as a major emerging oil and gas hub, with huge U.S. corporate investments already baked in. Second, it's becoming an important source of energy for the U.S. itself. Third, there's this strategic imperative to, contain China's growing economic and military footprint in the region. And fourth, the simple fact that the Venezuelan regime, in its current state, has the capacity to jeopardize that entire energy matrix we talked about. It needs to be neutralized from that perspective.
Okay, so if the motive is largely asset protection, how much of the recent U.S. military activity, that flotilla, for instance, is genuinely about geopolitics versus, say, just a renewed focus on the war on drugs?
Probably both. But the geopolitical angle feels very heavy here. That naval deployment, the largest U.S. military deployment in the area for decades. Sure, it was officially framed around counter-narcotics, but the real purpose seems much clearer. Ramp up the pressure on Caracas specifically to protect those multi-billion-dollar U.S. energy assets next door in Guyana. And you have to remember the corporate side. Chevron just recently bought Hess. That deal basically secured Chevron's access to Guyana's massive oil bonanza.
Right, that was a huge deal.
Huge. So this corporate dependency on Guyana makes the U.S. commitment to protecting Guyana's borders pretty much non-negotiable. The pressure campaign seems aimed at cracking the unity within the Venezuelan regime, especially within the military. Maybe hoping the military might eventually ease out Maduro, who, let's not forget, has a $50 million U.S. bounty on his head.
So in the bigger picture, the grand chessboard of U.S. rivalry with Beijing and Moscow, regime change in Venezuela might be seen by some U.S. strategists as sort of the low-hanging fruit to secure a vital energy region.
That certainly seems to be part of the thinking, yes. Low-hanging fruit in the context of that larger hegemonic competition. And look, it all connects. This pressure on Venezuela is part of a broader, coordinated push. Think about the new security agreements with Mexico, with Ecuador. Think about the increased military presence across the Caribbean generally. They even deployed F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico recently. That's a pretty clear warning signal, not just to Caracas, but to criminal groups everywhere, from Haiti down to the Andes.
But when the U.S. deploys a major naval force like that, it must trigger some historical anxieties across the Caribbean, right? Regional governments must be concerned about a return to, I don't know, gunboat diplomacy, or worse, an actual shooting war, given the long history of American intervention there.
Oh, absolutely. There's a definite concern.
But the sources show the regional view isn't monolithic. It seems quite divided, actually. You've got countries like Trinidad and Tobago, and obviously Guyana itself, favoring a tough line on Caracas, mostly because of that direct border threat. But then you have pro-Venezuelan nations like St. Vincent and the Grenadines openly criticizing the U.S. actions, and Grenada apparently offered to mediate. So it's a real mix of anxiety and maybe cautious support, depending on where you sit.
That's right. And looking ahead, the signs point to the U.S. continuing to apply more pressure, both economically and militarily. And interestingly, even though that muscular U.S. policy makes some neighbors nervous, a tough stance on Caracas, specifically one that supports the territorial integrity of Guyana's borders, is probably viewed by most key players in that energy matrix as, well, the more constructive outcome for long-term stability. Better the devil you know, perhaps. And these actions, they aren't happening in isolation. They feel like stage setting for the upcoming Summit of the Americas. That's happening in the Dominican Republic in December. Washington seems to be sending a very clear message, not just regionally, but to China and Russia, too. The U.S. is back, acting as a stronger player, and this strategic region is absolutely critical to Washington's interests. So what does this all mean? It means we should expect more developments. This geopolitical fault line seems set to widen further.
Thank you for diving deep with us today into this really complex picture, this convergence of energy wealth, criminal networks, and great power competition down in the Southern Caribbean. It's clear, isn't it, that the collision of these forces makes this region a potential hotspot for real conflict. And that is definitely why you should care. Now, as we wrap up, here's something to think about, a provocative final thought for you. We've established that the U.S. pressure campaign seems partly aimed at regime change in Venezuela. Fair enough. But we also just discussed how American energy companies, especially after that massive Chevron Hess deal, are now strategically dependent on Guyana's huge but contested oil reserves. So the question is, what does that growing corporate dependency actually mean for the U.S. government's flexibility? How does it affect their ability to maintain or maybe even dial down the pressure in its anti-Maduro policy going forward? Can they balance both aims? That's a massive question for you to explore. We'll see you on the next deep dive. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the Geostrategic Podcast for more in-depth analysis on topics that shape our world. Stay informed, stay ahead, and stay tuned for the next episode.